Well, good afternoon, Tiger Bay. Thank you so much for logging in today. This is our second Zoom-related meeting. Last week's was great. This week's, I think, will be even better. And we're thrilled to have a panel back together of media that we had last year and was one of our most popular programs. I'll be handing it off to Jane Watrel here in just a minute to introduce our panel. But a special thanks to Peter, Matt, Anna, and Jason for joining us today. There will be more announcements at the end of the meeting, but again, just a chance to say thank you for logging in and taking time out of your busy schedules. We're going to talk a little politics today. We're going to talk a little maybe legislative session, maybe COVID response. I think all of that in between. There is so much going on in Florida politics right now, and we could not have four better people to talk about it. So with that, Jane, if you want to introduce them and let them kind of give some opening thoughts, and then we'll get into our questions from the board members.
I will, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. What a difference a year makes. Last year, we had these esteemed members of the Fourth Estate at an evening meeting at the Citrus Club. Free drinks, food, and we learned a lot about the ins and outs of Tallahassee. Well, this time, we're just going to learn about the ins and outs of Tallahassee in the comfort of our home or audiences. I'd like to introduce the panelists and let them tell you a bit about themselves. So Peter Schorsch of Florida Politics, Jason Garcia of the Orlando Sentinel, Matt Dixon, of Politico Florida, and Anna Ceballos of the News Service of Florida. So Anna, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about you and your publication?
Sure. So I am a government reporter for the News Service of Florida. We're a wire service for newspapers, TV stations, and radio stations, and just online platforms. And we pretty much cover everything that goes on, whether it's politics or state government. We cover the budget, education, healthcare, tourism, anything that you can think of that state agencies touch. And I've been working there for about almost 2 years now, or a year and a half. I don't even know what time it is anymore. So I think it's been a year and a half. And yeah, I mean, I cover education, criminal justice, and I tend to pick up a lot of the political coverage as well. So that's pretty much my beat.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, I'm in Tallahassee for Politico. We have as many of you know, a Florida bureau with, I believe there's 6 of us. We're all located in Tallahassee, and we kind of are similarly structured as the news service. We have education beat. We're focused mostly on Tallahassee and state government, but we have education beats, environment, transportation, medical marijuana is another big one for us. So we sort of, touch on a lot of the policy issues, and then we have our morning newsletter for Playbook that focuses a lot on the politics of the state. So touch on policy and politics and try to be as broad ranging as we can. But like everyone else right now, it's been sort of pandemic coverage wall to wall. So we're figuring out that balance right now.
Is your newsletter free? Can our members subscribe to it?
Yep. Our Florida, we have a couple newsletters, but our biggest one is free. It's called Florida Playbook. And if you were to just Google Florida Playbook, it would be the first thing that popped up.
Great, thanks. Next up is Jason Garcia, who last year was with Florida Trend. But Jason, you're now with the Sentinel.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I think it was about the time this last year that I came back to the Sentinel. Yeah, I don't really have a beat at the Sentinel. I sort of cover the intersection of business and public policy. So sometimes that's local, sometimes that's state. Lately, it's been federal government stuff. Sort of like Matt said, I think everybody's all on COVID all the time on some angle. So a lot of my focus lately has been on CARES Act and congressional response, that sort of thing. But yeah, generally before coming back to the Sentinel, I was at Florida Trend for about 5 years. And then before that, I had been with the Sentinel before. Mostly covering the theme park industry and state politics.
Thanks. And last but not least, who's in the Bat Cave, Peter Schorsch from Florida Politics. Take it away.
Jane, thank you for having me. This was my idea to bring this group back because I thought I did such a good job last year, and I wanted to try and do it again. I remember eating all of your food and drinking all of your drinks. And I'm a little disappointed that I'm not going to have that opportunity to do that again. So I brought my own lunch. I didn't want you all to think that I was going hungry during this pandemic. I'm the publisher of FloridaPolitics.com. We have reporters throughout the state, Jacksonville, Orlando, Naples, South Florida, et cetera. We focus a lot on the the campaigns and politics part of Florida politics, although we have a robust government section. We were actually the outlet that broke the news about the first coronavirus cases being in Florida. And we've switched our gears really to offer kind of a statewide perspective on the response. And so people that were reporting about campaign finance 3 months ago are now reporting about, they're breaking news about deaths in Pinellas County nursing homes. And so it's an interesting time for our organization. I also have a morning newsletter that is called Sunburn. I stole the idea from Matt's organization and made it better. And so I try to do that. And then I also have a range of podcasts. So if you're not sick of listening to me today, I've got hours of me talking to my friends about Matt, basically available.
Ironically, who doesn't listen to any of them?
Or subscribe, perhaps. Well, let's kick this off. Anyone's willing to grab this, but the governor in recent weeks has taken a very defensive tone with the media, and as he's begun the process of reopening the state of Florida. I want all of your thoughts on this approach. How has it been received by the press corps? How might it serve or not serve him politically? We are in strange times.
Matt,
all right,
you were saying.
Well, go ahead, Peter.
No, go ahead, Matt. You always start off, give us the real answer, and then I'll give my biased answer.
Right. I'm just glad you guys noticed that the tone has been probably the past 3 or 4 weeks has been a lot more aggressive. I believe someone termed it Trumpian. He's starting to sound a little more like the president now. He is aggressive with those perceived as critics, which are in this case the media. Our folly in his mind is that we reported early on some of the forecasts related to deaths, related to number of cases, hospital beds, ventilators, and some of those early forecasts were quite dire, and they got coverage when they came out. Most of the forecasts were, as has been noted by others, this isn't a unique observation, but those forecasts were based on the state doing nothing. So the state thankfully has taken some steps to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus and beat a lot of those forecasts. But it turns into kind of a low-hanging fruit narrative for the governor to jump on to say media organizations reported on these early forecasts that they were wrong, so therefore they were raising a sort of a false red flag. I think politically it's the governor's transitioned here. For his first 2 legislative sessions, he was very moderate, very popular. He threw enough things to Republican supporters to keep their support, but he focused on he had things like teacher pay and boosting spending on the environment that he had sort of this unease with Democrats who were, happy that a Republican governor was giving some of their priorities more than lip service. I think that is largely gone. Everyone's sort of retreated to their corners, and the partisan norm that has defined Tallahassee and largely state government for a very long time is back. It's Democrats versus DeSantis, and everyone's heels are kind of dug in right now. So in a lot of ways, it's almost a return to sort of the normal way this ecosystem operates. It was an odd 2 sessions with a Republican governor taking what was seen as more of a moderate path, but throughout the coronavirus coverage, or throughout coronavirus at least, he's returned to sort of what Rick Scott looked like, and the recent sort of status quo here.
Peter?
Matt is spot on this. I think people have put their jerseys back on when it comes to this situation, and Republicans are Republican again, and Democrats are Democrating. It's unfortunate because I think Ron DeSantis had a shot there for a little while to be what I was calling a 2-to-1 governor. His approval rating was in the 60s, high 60s. Even I know I think he was at like 67% or something like that going into this session. And now he's at like 51%. While he still has a pretty big approval to unfavorable approval rating, he's no longer that in that sweet spot that Jeb was in for a while, that Charlie was in at the beginning of his tenure. And it's unfortunate because by and large, and this is the argument right now, and you saw this in the Wall Street Journal this week, did Florida get lucky or not? And if I was Ron DeSantis, I'd be pissed about that too. I don't think he sees his decisions as luck. I think he thinks he implemented a neo-libertarian divide the state up into regions kind of approach to things, and I think he thinks it paid off. Unfortunately, and I think one of the areas where Ron DeSantis is right is, Florida happens to get all these Bigfoot national reporters. And they come into Florida and they talk to, Democratic operatives and lawmakers, and they go back and they report these horrible stories about Florida man. And we saw that it started with the people on the beach in Jacksonville, that they were out at the beach early. And lo and behold, there hasn't been a spike in cases out of Duval County. This week we saw there was a story in Yahoo News about how coronavirus did in Ron DeSantis. And that's just not the case. If you think about it, Ron DeSantis right now, if you had to name anybody who's the front runner for the 2024 nomination, it's the guy who was sitting next to Donald Trump when Trump offered to hold his placard on an easel. You never see Trump, supplicate to anyone. And that was Ron DeSantis. So I think he's very controversial. I think he's got a massive problem with the unemployment system, which I know Jason will probably talk about. But right now, I think he's half right in being, repelled by some of the national criticism, some of the editorial board criticism. But no matter what, he has certainly dropped in the approval ratings since the beginning of the pandemic.
How about it, Jason? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I can't wrap my head around the logic of it, and I'm sort of curious to get the folks that are covering this stuff on a more daily basis. The strategy here seems to be to create this narrative that it was never a big deal in the first place, rather than I did a really good job responding to it. And I just don't understand the thinking behind doing that. And every time he then talks about how Florida has handled it, he's undermined himself by making a big deal for a half hour first of, hey, this was never a big deal in the first place. So I don't, it's sort of inexplicable to me. I assume he is clearly following the Trump model. I think the difference is he doesn't speak directly to Fox News, right? Like Fox News isn't going to carry all his briefings live. So I don't know that the strategy necessarily works, but I'm curious what the other panelists think of the strategy behind it.
What do you think, Anna?
Yeah, that's been interesting in terms of, I think when he's aired the most grievances has been during press conferences where he needed the most attention on what he was going to announce. Like, for example, the first phase of reopening the economy, I think it lasted about 25 minutes of going through a presentation of here's all the headlines that were wrong, going into details of sentences that were buried in stories, like 2 months ago, someone said this. And everyone was tuning in, excited perhaps to hear, what the state would be doing starting May 4th. And, everyone was just sitting there waiting to hear what they've been waiting to hear for weeks after being, hunkered down in their houses. And I don't know if the general public, I don't know who that message is aimed for, if it's to the media or to supporters who might like that rhetoric. But it's kind of interesting, again, like understanding the logic behind that strategy, because it's obviously planned. It's not just one time that he's done it. So I'm wondering what the logic is.
Well, it's interesting. I guess time will tell. The next question we want to move on to is our financial state in Florida. Early indications are, and this is right up Jason's alley, that sales tax collections for the first month of the COVID shutdown could be $700 million below the initial projections. A sure sign of more bad revenue news to come. What are you seeing and hearing that we should expect in the way of state and local revenue shortfalls? Do you think the state will make the cuts, Jason, since that's sort of your alley?
Yeah, sure. So we don't know the final number yet, right? But it seems pretty safe to assume at this point that the general revenue shortfall just for March is going to be about $500 million. And March is like you're only looking at a couple of weeks of like really bad times. April will make March look like a good month. So the financial situation is really tough right now. One of the very interesting dynamics playing out that will be sort of fascinating to watch is there's going to be, I think, a big effort to avoid any sort of special session before November to cut the budget. They desperately want to avoid imposing either cuts or tax increases in that, and also creating a platform for everybody to talk about the unemployment system all over again. And so they're going to try their best, I think, to avoid that. The problem is they're sitting on about $4 billion of revenue, which is a lot of money, but there's a real chance that you could burn through that by July 1st. So whether or not they can actually do that will ultimately hinge on whether or not they get a bailout from the feds. And one of the interesting political dynamics that's playing out, because I've been spending a lot of time on the Washington piece of this, nationally, there's emerging this partisan divide where Democrats want money for cities, states, and local governments, and Republicans don't. And Republicans are sort of rallying around the idea that we don't want to bail out blue states. Well, you've got the Senate president here, you got the House budget chair, all saying sort of we kind of need that federal money to avoid cuts. So they want it, but they're not being very loud about it yet because they don't really want to interfere with that national narrative that this is a blue state thing. So watching how Florida Republicans handle that in trying to get federal money that could patch their budget shortfalls and get them to the point where they can wait until after the election before they have to really start doing their own cutting. Watching how they sort of work that balance will be really interesting.
And
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Matt.
There's, upwards of, I think just shy of $6 billion right now that the state that has come to the state that's kind of sitting there. And one of the issues that the presiding officer, Senate President Galvano and House Speaker Oliva are concerned about is guidance on how that money can be spent. They're sort of waiting on if it can be used to backfill programs that general revenue would generally be used for. Is starting to disappear. So we have this, that Jason summed it up really well. We have all of that in the background along with legislative leaders right now saying, well, we know we're going to get this money from the feds, but we still don't know exactly what we can legally do with it, which is another layer of complication. And I think without question, there's probably not going to be a near-term special session to deal with this. The fiscal year, July 1st, is the key date to watch there. I think Jason's absolutely right. They would prefer to not do it before an election because for obvious reasons. One, just everyone wants to campaign to the degree they can, don't want to be stuck up here in Tallahassee, dealing with the things that, nobody really wants to pay attention to during an election year. But also just because of the unemployment system, the revenue shortfalls, the unemployment rate, there's so many bad economic numbers that nobody's going to want to highlight during an election year. So there's, I think, a couple layers of complications. And one of the earliest steps is just lawmakers, legislative leaders, budget chairs figuring out how and where they can use the federal money that is essentially going to float the state.
I think because this place is empty back here, I'm the one person that's inside the Magic Kingdom right now. I think they're actually, I'm gonna lay down a prediction opposite Jason, say I think that they will go into special session beforehand. And I think it will be just to specifically earmark that $6 billion. And that $6 billion is just kind of, it's just there, and it's just such a big matzo ball that nobody knows what to do with, like you all said. But I think that they are going to get in there and they're going to have to appropriate that out. Because if you don't, then it's not that you advocate your responsibility, but the opportunity to allocate $6 billion, no matter what the debate on the floor will be, will look as if they went out and did something kind of the reverse of what the two previous panelists were saying. I get it that nobody wants to hear about, the Democrats will be on the House floor complaining about the unemployment system. I think one of the things that would be really bad is if that $6 billion isn't used, or if the executive branch, Jared Moskowitz, gets to just backfill in things. And so I think you'll see, the Republican lawmakers get up there before July 1.
Before this fiscal year, you think?
I think so.
Huh.
Anna,
and again, just on that narrow focus, I think they're going to be almost required to.
And Peter, one of our Tiger Bay members just said that you win the background contest.
That's all I wanted. I'm out of here. I've got another panel over with the Suncoast Tiger Bay. I got to go, Robert.
I was cheering for the dinosaur to get him before he changed there.
Anna, any thoughts?
Well, I'm not going to make any predictions regarding special sessions. I think our reporting has kind of shown that, for example, like Rob Bradley, like the Senate budget chief, they're still on the fence about saying anything. But I do know, for example, covering education, I know that the CARES Act has been slowly rolling into some of like their budgets, like the aid, and just looking at the projections for their budgets, they're really, hurting in terms of like just loss of sales revenue, for example, with like just events that they had on campus. And the refunds that they had to do for housing. So there's definitely a lot of people across the state that have questions related to how to recover from this, including small school districts. For example, I visited one in North Florida, a district that's still hurting from the hurricane, and the superintendent there told me that the Department of Education has already kind of prepared them for budget cuts, but they don't really know what range. So there's a lot of uncertainty at this moment, especially financially. And with the fiscal year coming in July 1st, like people are wondering, like lawmakers, a lot of people have told me that they really want lawmakers to come back and kind of give them some reassurance as to what to expect for the upcoming fiscal year as they prepare for budget cuts or less revenue coming in.
I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to start taking some questions from our members. But Peter, I'm going to start with you because of your background. Central Florida's economic base of tourism and hospitality stands to be hit especially hard by this and may be slower than other sectors of the economy to recover. What do you think the future of Florida tourism is going to look like in a post-COVID world?
I mean, it breaks my heart. I mean, you're talking to the father of a 7-year-old girl who, she cried 3 weeks ago when she realized that she's probably never going to get to hug Mickey or Rapunzel again, no matter what they do when they open up the parks. It's ironic that Disney's streaming service right now is probably its workhorse when everything else is shut down. And as somebody who has always a Disney cruise booked up, I don't know when those ships are going to line up right now. I have been a pessimist this entire time on this situation. I think it's going to be catastrophic. I think Disney has a lot of smart people, and I'm going to wait for the text message to come in from Adam Babington saying that I'm crazy, but I don't know. I think one of the major things here is the legal liability. Until you can make it possible for businesses to open up 100% and not be sued because somebody contracted COVID-19 and possibly died from getting it at your facility, I think businesses are going to be hamstrung in what they do. And there's no bigger business in Orlando than Disney. So can you imagine what it's going to be like when you put in 75,000 people back there, or even if they phase in like what they're doing in Shanghai right now, or if you put 7,000 people out onto a cruise ship and 25 people get COVID-19, 5 of them die, and then they sue. And that just keeps going on and on and on. And so until you can insure for that, I don't think that there's an answer short of a vaccine. So, I think it's nothing short of a catastrophe. I think it's much worse than we are understanding. I know that if you opened Disney right now, there would be 75,000 people there. I mean, we saw that on the last night that it was opened, but those people would get sick and they would die, or some of those people would get sick and die. Same thing with Universal. So I just think it's a terrible, terrible situation that's probably not going to resolve itself till 2021.
Jason, you used to cover the theme parks.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've covered them very closely. I think Peter's right that it's going to be really hard for them to get back to any sort of semblance of normal until there's some sort of effective vaccine. The liability stuff, I think that's a concern. I sometimes think that gets overhyped somewhat. It's going to be hard to prove that you contracted a virus at a specific spot when it's still going around. It will be an issue, in bigger places like a cruise ship. If you get a bunch of people on there, that'll become a bigger problem. I think for Disney, honestly, the bigger problem is just the marketing impact, right? If there'll be, invariably someone is probably going to get sick there if they open up before there's a vaccine, and there'll be headlines about it, right? And so that's just going to deter travel all over again. How you sort of compensate for that, I don't know. I think we'll probably see all sorts of like technological advances that we don't really envision right now, including like just sort of the way you experience theme parks might change significantly. But how fast all that happens, I just have no idea.
Anna, you've been up in North Florida, for a different kind of tourism, and we have our beaches, which we don't have in Central Florida. What are your thoughts on the future of tourism? They are starting to open up the beaches.
They're starting to slowly open up, right? I think it might be a different story, right? For like rural Florida, where, you know, I know, for example, Jackson County started opening up again, like the beaches this weekend. And there's, you know, just a lot of conversation because they're not used to that much tourism than, like, say, for example, Palm Beach or Miami, but everyone's just taking precautions. I mean, I really don't know how. I know we have the border here with Georgia. That's been another concern of just having people coming in and out through the borders, and just if they loosen up the regulations in Georgia, how does that impact Florida? But I really don't understand. I wouldn't really know what to say about tourism here in North Florida. I haven't really covered it that much.
Matt?
Can I jump in there really quick on that one? Just because.
Of course.
I mean, that's what I'm great at these panels on, is jumping in on other people's answers.
All right. Go ahead.
I mean, you should be able to put virtual backgrounds in other people's boxes. That would be, now somebody comes up with that, I can put something like
A beach? You want to give me a beach over here?
I would give you a beach, and I'd give a Packer fan like the inside of like the Superdome for Minnesota or whatever they are. You know, I was lucky enough to get out to Pinellas County's beaches yesterday, and I think one of the things that could make this work was what I saw, which was like a near police state. And I say that in a nice way. Pinellas County Sheriff Department, FWC, Coast Guard, etc., were everywhere. I think we saw, like, within the spate of an hour, a boat, a plane, you know, ATVs, people walking by, and they weren't enforcing social distancing, but their presence enforced the social distancing. And so I think one of the ways you could make the beaches work, and especially down in South Florida, is overwhelmed with the police force. And so you kind of have to trade out right now, you know, little freedom for just those guys and ladies walking around, making sure that, you know, there aren't groups of 50 packed together, et cetera.
Matt, anything to throw in there?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a lot to add, other than now we know where Florida politics will be on the forthcoming tort reform debate. That's good to telegraph that. Tell Senator Brandes we say hello. But as far as, I mean, everyone hit on all the points. It's going to be devastating. It's the drawbacks of having an economy so based on tourism and hospitality. I mean, frosty coconut drinks are the things that make this economy going right now. They're not flowing, and they're probably not going to be for a very long time, which is you know, hit on by everyone else. I don't have any, you know, keen insight other than it's going to be a problem for a very long time, and I think everyone knows that.
We've got a couple of questions. We're going to open it up to our Tiger Bay members, and one of them is about Commissioner Freed and Governor DeSantis. They seem to be jousting daily. Are we seeing the start of the 2022 race already? There are several questions about Nikki Freed's strategy. Anybody want to grab that?
All right. Well, either governor or Senate for Commissioner Freed. I think, I mean, she's as the only statewide elected Democrat, she's the effective head of the party. So I think whoever that was going to fit in that role in a high profile situation like this, they're going to be in the middle of the political sniping. That is her role right now. She's taking it on, you know, it seems happily. But yeah, the governor himself hasn't necessarily directly engaged. That's been through the Republican Party of Florida, which is an extension of the governor's office. So the point is well taken. The governor himself is his personal messaging and the things that come out of his mouth have not necessarily focused on that sort of back and forth. But without question, those two are going after it. And I think most people see Commissioner Freed as having higher aspirations. I honestly don't know if it's governor or U.S. Senate. I think there's competing philosophies on that. But without question, I don't think she sees agriculture commissioner as her political ceiling, and picking high profile fights with the governor of Florida is a good way to expand, you know, people knowing who you are.
Yeah, she's definitely gotten a lot of headlines. You know, she's been invited to a lot of she's gotten a lot of national spotlight on shows like CNN, and she's been, you know, a pretty frequent guest, and she's no stranger to, she's not shy to criticize the governor. And I don't know, I mean, the fights or like the topics that she picks, I mean, they're pretty strategic in terms of, you know, they kind of always aim for topics like just a cabinet meeting, for example, just transparency with the administration and how she wants to, you know, have a role in what she can like be part of, and the governor just shuts it down in terms of not holding a meeting, something that could be pretty simple. So just small things that can be pretty strategic in terms of, hey, I'm here to fight for what I can do for Floridians, and let's do this small thing like a meeting, and not being able to do that, it's one indirect way of shutting her down.
There's nobody that's benefited from the last 3 months more politically than Nikki Fried. And it's not just because of the pandemic or the reaction, but if you go, you think about where she started it, Andrew Gillum is off the map now. I mean, and there was still a fight for who was the titular head of the Florida Democratic Party. And, one night in a Miami Beach hotel room, as it has to a lot of us, changed his life. And so, she is not as in much of a rush as she may have been in to establish her bona fides on that. We have to remember that the 2022 gubernatorial race will be, it's going to be directly impacted by 2020. I know that's easy to say, but, if Trump is reelected, Ron DeSantis is going to have a lot of problems when you think about the historical norms, although, of course, Trump bends them. But if it is if Joe Biden gets in there and, you have the first term reaction to him, then Nikki Fried is going to be in a lot of trouble. I think the Republicans have made a mistake here by making her a martyr. And I keep using that term over and over again. If I was Ron DeSantis, I'd be loading her up with stuff to do. I'd give her the most boring task force ever and say, hey, listen, we need a 40-page report. Make her go solve how you're going to open up restaurants. Make her go do this stuff. Instead, you're not keeping her busy, and she gets to send out press releases. And the natural inclination of the media is to do, well, he said, she said. And this is literally the greatest he said, she said, other than our podcast, which you can download on Apple iTunes. It's the greatest opportunity for he said, she said between Ron DeSantis and Nikki Fried.
Ron DeSantis should make her responsible for unemployment.
Yeah.
Yes, which leads me to the next question. Is there any action that can be taken against the company? This is from a Tiger Bay member. Any action that can be taken against the company that built our unemployment website? And what do you expect to learn from the investigation being ordered by the governor, Jason?
I honestly, I have no idea what action you could take against the company. Part of the issue is they built the website I think they wanted, the whole push, everything around the 2011 changes was about restricting, the governor's own budget aide said it clearly. It was we can either raise taxes or we can control the outflow of benefits, and we're not going to raise taxes, right? It's a zero-sum game when you're talking about unemployment, right? So I don't know how deeply you want to dive into that world where Deloitte might have some receipts, right? In terms of what I think that needs to be done is obviously one of the biggest rivalries in Florida politics right now is Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis, right? So everything about that is about making Rick Scott wear the unemployment mess as much as possible. I get why Ron DeSantis is doing that. There's probably, there's a lot of merit to that. I mean, it was under Rick Scott's regime that all happened. Ultimately, I think Ron DeSantis is going to wear it though, because he's the guy in charge when it's really blowing up.
Matt?
I think the investigation is, because of the rivalry element is, anything bad that can be put on the Scott administration will be there. And there are some elements, that they've been reported on. The governor's current chief of staff, Shane Strum, was the chief of staff for Charlie Crist at the beginning part of negotiating the contract with Deloitte. So I would assume any element of that is not going to be in the investigation. But rightly, I think there's probably going to be a close accounting for how this thing came together in the Scott administration. It's going to be viewed to a degree, I think, fairly through a political lens because of some of the things Jason touched on. But it's also, it's where this current boondoggle was born. So it's going to get a thorough vetting.
The best thing Ron DeSantis can do is pay people. Right?
Yeah, without question. I agree with that totally. Yeah, checks are good policy in politics right now.
Okay, let's see, from our Tiger Bay member. Our Tiger Bay member, Phil Diamond, is asking, what do you think Governor DeSantis is going to do with the budget that was passed by the legislature? Also, how come so many bills haven't been sent to the governor yet? When do you think they will be sent to him?
With the budget, I don't because of some of the federal money, I don't think the veto list is going to be crazy big. I don't think he's going to break any records or anything. I know a lot of people are looking at what the governor is going to do as far as vetoing budget items to generate some revenue for this. And I don't think it necessarily needs to be massive. There's not that much money there relatively. And I think largely the reason that bills, and including the budget, haven't moved to him, a lot of them, don't have effective dates for a while. And we have a functioning government right now, but it's not functioning regularly. I mean, the normal processes of government for doing these things are effectively shut down, and understandably so, because it's, all coronavirus all the time. So I do think there's time to work some of those things out. And I'm not, I don't think there's going to be any sort of record-breaking veto list, and some of those more traditional.
Hold on, I'm going to check real quick. Okay, so I checked with the guys. I checked with. I'm really surprised you said that, Matt. And I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just like, you do have these first of all, whichever smart members right now say, hey, I put this member project in February. I think, given the circumstances, I would like the governor to please veto my own member project. The first 10 of those people who do that are going to get incredible press. Number two, though, I'm surprised you say that, Matt, because it's the teacher salaries are just they're just sitting out there as something that could get zoinked. I know Jason's going to talk about the tax package. I don't know that you can do anything with that, but also Sadowski. I mean, I think when we find ourselves in a $3 or $4 billion hole by the time he has to sign that budget, I think you could whack all the member projects, and then I think you could whack teacher salaries for this and say, hey, listen, we're in a pandemic. We need another year on the teacher salaries. I promise you I'll be back. I know that would be a big, a big issue, but I don't know how you can push that through given the shortfalls they're going to have.
Yeah, and the governor's already indicated, that, it was a few weeks ago, so a lot has changed in 3 weeks, but he did mention during coronavirus press conference, I still do not want to touch that teacher pay thing, but again, not knowing just how much money we're losing or what we're going to do with the budget. I don't know how. I believe it ended in what, I forget what the final price tag was, but it was, more than $500 million and for teacher salaries. I mean, that money is pretty useful right now for pretty much anything else.
Well, and also things like the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, like Peter said, you can't sweep those in a line item veto. So that, some pots of money that are large are going to be left intact. And I think largely he doesn't need to have he doesn't need to break the record. They're getting billions of dollars from the feds. Another $25 million in vetoes isn't going to make the difference, and it can be very politically unpopular, even with his own members. So, I guess I get it. The temptation is there. I wouldn't be shocked, I suppose. The way I look at it is he doesn't need to do that. It's not going to make that big of a difference. And, why not try to curry some favor and not whack everyone's stuff?
I would sort of expect him to wipe out just about every member project, because that's sort of a politically easy thing to do. I don't think anybody's expecting to get that money at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if he leaves the big ticket stuff alone, sort of to what Matt is saying. I could see him leaving the teacher salary there with the understanding that two things are going to happen between now and the end of the summer. They're either going to be able to use federal money to backfill all this stuff, or they're going to have to go cut the budget. So whether or not he signs that teacher raise right now has no bearing on whether or not it actually gets paid out, right? So there's a lot of logic to be said for don't make your governor the bad guy on that, right? Don't make him eat vetoing the teacher pay when the legislature can fall on that grenade for them if they have to, and the feds might bail you out anyway. So I wouldn't be, I guess I'm sort of calling out a middle ground. I do think all budget projects are gone, but that's because that's something DeSantis can point to and say, look what I did, even in the grand scheme of things, $300 million and an extra $300 million or whatever there is in there isn't a lot of money. In what
you guys don't think that they're going to have to be guilted into redoing the budget here come June 15th? Jason, you said what, 750? They lost 750 last time. They're going to be down 1.5, 2 point. They're going to be down $3 billion by May 30th. By June 30th, they're going to be off $5.5 billion. The way
sort of extrapolate numbers in a way that shouldn't quite be. So right now, as of May 1st, they were down 770 in sales tax, right? But that includes the portion of sales tax that gets paid to the counties like that. So that's not all general revenue.
It's not all state money. Yeah, it's not all state money.
I think it's probably safe to say general revenue will be down about $500 million for this month. April will be much worse. Call it $1 billion. I think you probably can get to July 1st based on the $4 billion you've got in reserves.
Okay.
Whole time trying to get federal money to patch you through the rest of the way. So I don't think they're going to have to go back unless, if the virus erupts again somehow and we have another April, maybe they would. But I mean, we're so close to the end of the fiscal year that I don't think he's going to need to change this year's budget. I mean, you could make an argument for doing that, but I don't think he has to. I don't see why he.
And also, and back to the teacher pay. I mean, looking at through a political lens, teachers with social distancing, with students at home, parents more and more are realizing just like the power and like how useful and important teachers are. I cannot imagine politically just taking away pay raises for teachers after the coronavirus hit and everyone realized their value. So that might actually be a saving grace for that specific pot of money if the budget needs to be renegotiated or amended.
Another sign too, by the way, that I think they can make it to the end of the year is the way they extended the corporate income tax payment deadlines. I don't think if they were really in danger of this year's, the budget we are in right now, of not making it to the end of the year, they would have done that. So I think they believe they can get to July 1st.
It was cut down. It was cut down a lot from where it normally, but the tax package was signed almost immediately by the governor too after session, which I think some saw as a signal that they thought they'd be okay for. I think some saw that as reading the governor signing that so quickly that sort of where their frame of mind was on that.
This is just a real quick shout out or point that Amy Baker and company really need to get together. They need to get together and put together some sort of.
I don't think we're going to see I think June is the next. I don't think we're going to see them do it. Well, I mean, they're constantly working, but as far as anything formal, I think I think it was President Galvano who indicated that is when they expect those guys to get together next. And that's just for anyone who doesn't know the name Amy Baker, the state revenue estimators. She's the legislature staff economist, and her merry band of misfits get, and I say that endearingly, get together revenue forecast for the state.
Let me say this on the tax package real quick. I think that was about one thing and one thing only, and that was about getting the corporate tax refunds out the door.
Sure.
So there's for those that don't know, a couple of years ago, long before they had any idea what it would cost, they committed to refunding a bunch of corporate income tax money related to the way the federal law changed state income tax costs. So that turned into be an enormous amount of money, $543 million, that they were scheduled to send out the door by May 1st. Of course, all this happens. It's a terrible time to be giving the 1% of businesses that pay any corporate income tax in Florida $543 million. But they couldn't do it until he signed that tax package, because one of the things they did in session was rejigger those refunds to steer more money to companies that give to the private school voucher program. So he needed to get that bill signed before the refunds could go out the door. And I think they wanted to get those refunds out the door as quickly as possible to stop taking heat over, to just end that issue.
We have a question from Tiger Bay member Khalid Munir. How do you see COVID-19 affecting the upcoming local and presidential elections in terms of accessibility from voters and new issues relating to the virus? It looks like you're in the Oval Office, Peter, if you want to start, or some semblance of one.
It's a bizarre situation because we're arguing over this vote by mail issue here in Florida. And you've got the president, saying that basically an election held by all mail balloting is an opportunity for Democrats to steal it. And so he's laying the groundwork for that. Unfortunately, that's not stealing it, but the way that Republicans have dominated Florida politics for the last 3 decades now, is by dominating what was the absentee ballot process and now the vote by mail process. And so it's kind of odd that the president is sending this message. Every Republican consultant in Tallahassee, when they see those tweets, they cringe, because they know that the way that they get, thousands of votes out of the Sun City Center and the villages, et cetera, is by just pounding on those vote by mail ballots. And so that is, we're going to move to that. You're going to see, I don't know, I think it was like 50-50 during the gubernatorial race, election day turnout versus early and absentee voting. I think you're probably going to get to 75-80% early and absentee balloting, and maybe election day turn into something like 20-25%. That makes campaigns much more expensive. It extends the campaigning time. It's already been expensive to campaign in the era of expansive early and absentee voting. Now you're going to see this 45-day window, and I think you'll see pressure to kind of shorten that in the future. But for this election's purposes, remember, the primary is in August. I think it's August 24th or something like that, last week in August. Think 45 days out from that. That means that balloting is going to start in 2 months. And that's fascinating. And some of the places where you have primaries, like for this audience, Amy Mercado versus the always popular Rick Singh, you're going to have balloting going on in 2 months there. That's kind of interesting.
Oh, and nope, there's going to be fewer things. Well, it could change as election day approaches, but so far things like traditional canvassing, knocking on doors have, that hasn't existed. That's all online and phone now. So that's a very traditional sort of campaign election year sort of thing that's gone. So in-person fundraisers, something, somewhat you might not always think about, but the amount of money being raised, at least at the state level, I haven't looked at the federal numbers as close, is definitely down. So those are all things. In some of the bigger counties, I think most of the bigger counties are sending vote by mail requests to essentially all registered voters in their counties. If the big ones all aren't doing that, I know some are. So the transition to a more vote by mail sort of system, I think, is already, Florida was sort of already there with early and vote by mail as far as, over 50% of the electorate voting that way, but we're well on our way to expanding those numbers to the area that Peter was talking about.
Yeah.
Jane, this is Robert. Let's do one more question if you've got one there in front of you, and then we will say a thank you and send everybody on their way. Thank you so much.
I do have one. What do you all think the biggest story in the state is that's going on right now that's not getting enough attention? So what do you think the biggest story in the state that's not getting enough attention?
There is only one story. Go ahead, Anna.
I don't know if it's the biggest story, but one big story that has maybe not gotten as much attention has been what's going on in prisons. I've been reporting on it regarding just the measures that have been taken. There's rural counties are getting an enormous amount of cases just coming out of prisons. There's outbreaks going on. There's not enough testing until just recently. There's just inmates who can't socially distance and can't quite have the same measures as the community. And yet, there's not a lot of transparency going on, or it's starting to get more transparent, but for weeks, the secretary has, slowly let out information to the public regarding just what they were doing. And correctional officers are notorious for, or not notorious, but they have very risky and intense jobs. And right now they're putting their lives at risk, and prisons are already pretty short-staffed. And I can't imagine that this pandemic inside prisons and them being scared to take it back home won't force a bigger turnover rate for prisons, and therefore a bigger cost to the state in terms of how do they fix the recruitment and retaining of correctional officers. And it's just this ongoing problem within prison that could be exacerbated by the pandemic.
I'll say it's hard to say unemployment, but there's one issue about that right now the focus is getting everybody in the door, right? Just getting people paid. People are not really paying attention to the fact that the duration of Florida unemployment is only 12 weeks. That's the shortest in the nation right now. And some of that gets papered over right now by the federal government's response. But if the federal government doesn't continue paying for extended unemployment benefits after this round runs out, there's a whole bunch of people in Florida that are getting their benefits now are going to run out and that's all going to hit they have this sliding scale they set up, but the scale doesn't reset until the end of the year. So there's a lot of people that are going to hit their limit long before you get to the point where it resets. Like I said, the big issue right now is just getting people paid, right? So nobody's really too focused on that, but that is a huge thing that's looming out there, and that is like directly Rick Scott's legacy. That was the single biggest cut they made in that 2011 legislation.
I can think of all the Democrats out there that want me to say climate change, because you just keep seeing like article after article about, hey, don't forget about climate change. And I'm gonna say there isn't a story that isn't touched by this pandemic, and so it's almost you can't say that there isn't a story out there that's bigger than the top 50 pandemic related stories. I will say one thing that I think that is very interesting is how unified, I don't think enough credit has been given to the average Floridian and to the people at large that this has not turned into the purge. That you have people on week 7 of unemployment. You have people who have, there isn't a crime wave. There are some spikes in domestic and child abuse, which we very much need to address. But I don't think we are, and I think I fault both President Trump and to some extent Governor DeSantis and our leadership in not thanking people for the enormous hardships, losing graduations, not being able to say goodbye to loved ones who are dying in nursing homes and are kept out. It seemed, all of the people that have been, all the teachers that are having to, redo their lesson plans. I can't think about how many societal changes that we've been made. And I just don't think, unless you get up every day at that press conference in the White House or the governor's mansion and say thank you for the first 25 minutes, instead of attacking the media for a bad editorial that somebody wrote, I will say thank you at least, to my neighbors and people around me for the enormous work and contributions they're making.
I don't think anyone's talking nearly enough about how that background makes you look like an angry peacock. That's what I'm going with.
I'll throw one other out there too, is the fact that Florida is one of 2 states that still hasn't passed a law to effectively collect online sales tax, right? That was sort of inevitable that it was going to happen in the next couple of years. Now it is going to happen. I think there'll be a big effort to try and push that off until after the election, but so much of commerce is the shift to online shopping is accelerating incredibly rapidly right now, and so much of that revenue, anything you buy on Amazon's marketplace, there's no sales tax in Florida right now. That was that's a $700 million revenue impact before everything started shifting. So nobody's talking about that. It's going to be like one of the first places I think they go looking for revenue though.
Okay.
Well, guys, thank y'all so much, and I want you to know we had we had more attendees for this than even I was expecting. At one point, we were up near 120 live on the View. We were over 100 the entire time. Really can't thank you enough. I think that's a testament to the good coverage that you're all providing during this difficult time, and the interest that our members certainly have in learning more about what's happening in Florida as a result of COVID and in response to it. So again, thank you so much on behalf of our club. We look forward to having you again someday, whether that be remote or hopefully with beverages. And really, really can't thank you enough. And to the members still on the line, we will be back in touch soon with more announcements about future programming. And Jane, thank you for doing such a great job as our moderator. Greg, before we hang up, anything I'm forgetting?
Nope. We look forward to keeping our members up to date on, when we're going to be in touch in person again, or even doing one of these again. And thank you again to all panelists. This was amazing. We will be sending out the recordings in video and audio format soon after this. Takes a little bit to process, but I'll make sure to get that out there. And you can watch last week's recording as well on our website or on Facebook. And again, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
For having me.